The first person to insist it was impossible was Dr. Lionel Harcourt himself, and he did so with the thin, incredulous smile of a man accustomed to certainty. Sir Alister Pembroke lay dead in the small oak-panelled study at the back of Pembroke Court, the door locked from the inside, the windows bolted, the fire burned low to ash, and no trace of violence upon his body. He appeared, as several witnesses repeated in hushed tones, merely to have fallen asleep in his chair and never awakened. Yet the smell lingering faintly in the air told a different story. It was sharp, medicinal, unmistakable to Harcourt's trained nose. Poison. The circumstances were deceptively simple. Sir Alister, wealthy industrialist and noted benefactor, had dismissed his guests shortly after dinner. At 10 o'clock precisely, his valet, George Vickers, heard the study bell ring once, Sir Alister's signal that he required nothing further for the night. At 10:30, a curious silence fell. At 11, concerned by the extinguished lights, Vickers attempted to enter the study. The door would not open. It was forced only after the household gathered and the body was discovered exactly as Sir Alister had been left hours earlier. The key lay on the desk, plainly visible through the glass-panelled door before it was broken open. No one disputed this point, nor did anyone dispute that no one had entered or left the room in the interval. The windows were high, narrow, and sealed for winter. The fireplace showed no disturbance. Sir Alister's glass of brandy sat untouched at his elbow, and his coffee cup, brought earlier by the housemaid, was empty. It was that cup which provided the first and most confounding clue. Inside it, unmistakable upon later examination, were traces of digitalis, enough to kill a man of Sir Alister's age and condition. The conclusion seemed inevitable. The poison had been administered in the coffee, and yet this explanation collapsed almost as soon as it was spoken aloud. The coffee had been prepared in the main kitchen and carried directly to the study by Edith Marks, a girl of 19 who burst into tears the moment suspicion brushed against her. She swore she had touched nothing but the tray. The cook confirmed it. More damning still, Sir Alister's niece, Miss Clara Pembroke, testified that she herself had tasted the coffee moments after it was served. Sir Alister, complaining it was too hot, had pushed the cup aside. Clara had lifted it, taken 2 sips, and laughed at his fussiness. She suffered no ill effects whatsoever. The cup, therefore, could not have been poisoned at that time, but the poison was there. Dr. Harcourt demonstrated this with brisk efficiency at the inquest, producing the laboratory report with a snap of his fingers. Digitalis dissolved, unmistakable. The room grew uneasy. A clue that pointed in 2 directions at once is more troubling than none at all. Attention shifted, briefly and unproductively, to the brandy. But the glass was full, untouched. To the air itself, absurd, Harcourt declared, as digitalis could not be administered so. To the fire, the books, the papers on the desk. Nothing fit. There were suspects in abundance, of course. Sir Alister had quarrelled publicly with his business partner, Frederick Lowell, who departed the house shortly after dinner in a temper. His nephew, Henry Pembroke, stood to inherit handsomely and was known to be deeply in debt. Even Clara, devoted though she seemed, had argued fiercely with her uncle earlier that evening over a proposed marriage she disapproved of. Motive lay thick upon the ground. Opportunity did not. Locked rooms have a way of mocking motive. By morning the newspapers had seized upon the phrase the poisoned coffee mystery, and by afternoon the police were quietly admitting they were no closer to understanding how a man could be poisoned by a cup that had been harmless minutes before and untouched thereafter. The cup had not moved, the key had not moved, the room had not been entered. It was into this atmosphere of polite confusion and mounting embarrassment that Hercule Poirot arrived, summoned less by the police than by Clara Pembroke herself. He stood now in the study, small and immaculate, his bright eyes travelling not to the body, nor to the door, but to the coffee cup upon the desk. "Mon ami," he murmured, addressing no one in particular, "when a poison tells you a lie, it is not the poison that is clever, it is the person who chose it." He straightened the cup ever so slightly, aligning it with the papers beneath, and smiled to himself, a smile that suggested the crime was not impossible at all, merely very well disguised. Poirot wasted no time in questioning the official conclusions, while Inspector Jameson paced the study with the air of a man circling an invisible wall. The little Belgian remained quite still, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his gaze drifting with deliberate slowness from one object to another. He listened, he observed, and above all, he waited. "Locked from the inside, yes," Poirot said softly at last, nodding toward the shattered glass panel that had once formed the upper half of the door. "And yet we say this as though it explains something. It explains nothing, Inspector. It merely comforts us." Jameson bristled faintly. "The facts are plain enough, Monsieur Poirot. No one entered, no one left." "Ah," Poirot replied gently, "but facts are often like guests at a dinner party. They arrive together, yet some of them do not belong." He moved closer to the desk and examined the coffee cup again, not touching it, only observing. "Its rim. Mademoiselle Clara drank from this cup, yes?" "She did," Clara said from near the fireplace. Her face was pale but composed, her hands folded tightly together. "Twice, as I told the inspector. And you noticed nothing strange? No bitterness? No unusual taste? Nothing at all? It was ordinary coffee." Poirot nodded, satisfied, and turned instead to George Vickers. "You, my good man, you cleared away nothing after 10 o'clock?" "No, sir," Vickers replied stiffly. "Sir Alister gave the bell. That was all." Poirot's eyes flicked to the bell-pull by the fireplace. It hung straight, undisturbed. He crossed the room, peered into the hearth, and knelt briefly to inspect the ashes. No scraps of paper, no burned residue beyond the ordinary remains of coal and kindling. He rose without comment. Dr. Harcourt, watching him closely, gave a faint shrug. "You see, Monsieur Poirot, everything you look for has already been examined." Poirot smiled. "Naturally. That is why I look for what has not been examined." He moved next to the bookshelf and ran a finger lightly along the spines. One book sat slightly forward, its gilt lettering dulled where it had been handled more recently than the others. Poirot touched it delicately and drew it out. It was a medical reference, Sir Alister's, no doubt, a relic of his younger days when he had briefly studied medicine before turning to industry. "Curious," Poirot murmured. "A man who drinks his coffee, rings for no one, and then reads, what? About cardiac stimulants." Harcourt stiffened. "Digitalis is mentioned in that book, yes, but Sir Alister was no chemist," Poirot interrupted calmly. "He did not poison himself." "No one suggests that," Jameson said sharply. Poirot inclined his head. "Just so." He returned the book, but did not push it back fully into place. Instead, he looked at the desk once more, his attention lingering on the blotter. A faint circular mark showed where the coffee cup had rested, but it was not perfectly centered over the darker stain beneath, as though it had been moved slightly after being set down. "Inspector," Poirot said, "when Sir Alister pushed away the coffee because it was too hot, did he move the cup far?" Jameson frowned. "According to Miss Pembroke, he slid it aside. That is all. Yet afterward," Poirot said thoughtfully, "it sits here, quite neatly aligned, as though someone took care to place it so." Clara looked up sharply. "Are you suggesting someone returned it to the desk?" "I am suggesting," Poirot replied, "that the cup may have been touched after you drank from it." "But the door—" Jameson began. Yes, Poirot waved him off. "Always the door. We shall come back to the door." He turned suddenly to Edith Marks, who had been hovering near the doorway, eyes darting nervously. "Mademoiselle, when you brought the tray, was the spoon in the cup or beside it?" Edith hesitated. "In the cup, sir. Sir Alister preferred it that way." Poirot's eyes flicked to the saucer. The spoon lay neatly upon it now. "Someone," Poirot said quietly, "removed it." A silence fell over the room. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, yet it carried with it the faintest tremor of unease. "Digitalis," Poirot continued, "is not fast-acting when taken in small quantities, but it is cumulative. A residue left upon a spoon, stirred into the coffee after it cools, would explain much. Enough to kill, but not enough to leave an immediate taste." Dr. Harcourt shifted his weight. But who would do such a thing, and how, without entering the room? Poirot's smile returned, thin and knowing. "That, my dear doctor, is where the deception begins. Someone here relies very much on the locked door, and someone else relied on us believing the poison was meant to be found in the cup A. Lone." He glanced briefly at Clara, then at Henry Pembroke, who stood rigid by the window, his eyes fixed too intently on the garden outside. "The poison," Poirot said softly, "did not fool everyone. But it was chosen to fool us, just long enough, Poirot suggested with polite firmness that they adjourn to the drawing-room. The study, he said, had already spoken as much as it wished for the moment. People, on the other hand, spoke too freely, or not freely enough. It was there, amid the heavy curtains and the lingering scent of last night's cigars, that the voices of Pembroke Court began to unravel. Inspector Jameson conducted the questioning, but it was Poirot who listened. He seated himself slightly apart, hands folded, eyes half-lidded, as though he were dozing. Only the faint twitch of his moustache betrayed his attention. George Vickers was first. He repeated his account with mechanical precision. Sir Alister had been in good spirits after dinner, had retired to the study alone, and had rung the bell once at 10. No visitors, no disturbances, no unusual sounds. Poirot asked only one question. "You heard the bell from where you stood?" "Yes, sir. In the servants' hall, and if someone else had rung it—" Vickers blinked. "It would sound the same, sir." Poirot nodded, as though this confirmed something already settled in his mind. Edith Marks followed, wringing her hands, eager to be helpful, too eager. She described the coffee tray in minute detail, the china, the sugar bowl, the spoon. Poirot let her speak until her words began to tangle. "You say you placed the spoon in the cup," Poirot said gently. "Are you certain?" "Yes, sir, always. Yet when the body was found it lay upon the saucer." Edith's breath caught. Perhaps Sir Alister removed it himself?" "Perhaps," Poirot agreed mildly, though he did not drink the coffee. Her eyes flicked, just once, toward Henry Pembroke before dropping again. Poirot noticed Henry was next, and he greeted the process with a thin smile that never reached his eyes. He spoke smoothly of business disputes, of his uncle's stubbornness, of his own unfortunate debts, which he dismissed as irrelevant. His account of the evening matched the others, too neatly. "You left early," Poirot observed. "Before 10. "Yes. I had a headache. And yet," Poirot said, "the gardener saw your car still in the drive at 10:15. Henry's smile faltered. I returned briefly. I had forgotten some papers." "Did you enter the house?" "No." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Not even the servants' entrance?" Henry's denial came a fraction too quickly. Frederick Lowell proved more openly hostile. He resented the implication that his argument with Sir Alister meant anything at all. He had left, he said, in anger, and had not returned. Poirot asked him whether he knew anything of digitalis. Lowell laughed shortly. "I run factories, not apothecaries. Yet you once invested in a pharmaceutical concern," Poirot said quietly. Lowell's laugh died away. "Years ago." "Years," Poirot agreed, making a small note. "Last came Clara Pembroke." She answered calmly, but her composure seemed practiced, as though she had rehearsed it in solitude. She spoke of her affection for her uncle, of their disagreement, of tasting the coffee and setting the cup back where he could reach it later. "You moved it back?" Poirot asked. "Yes. I did not think—" "No, of course not," Poirot said kindly. "And afterward, I left him reading. Did he touch the cup again? I cannot say." Poirot regarded her for a long moment. "Mademoiselle, you are very honest, but you are also very careful." Colour rose faintly in her cheeks. "I loved my uncle." "I am sure you did," Poirot replied. "Love, however, does not prevent one from keeping secret. Sometimes it demands them." As the questioning drew to a close, the room felt heavier, the air thick with half-truths. Each account overlapped, yet none aligned perfectly. A car that left and returned, a spoon that moved, a bell that could be rung by anyone with access to a cord. Poirot rose at last, smoothing his coat. "You see, Inspector," he said softly, "they all tell the truth, but never the whole of it. One hides an action, another a motive, another a moment in time." Jameson exhaled sharply. "So what are we left with?" Poirot's eyes travelled once more around the room, lingering on each face in turn. "We are left," he said, "with a crime that required no entry, a poison that required no immediate swallowing, and a household where someone had both patience and opportunity." He smiled faintly. "And now, at last, they begin to contradict one another. That is always the beginning of the end." Poirot remained at Pembroke Court through the afternoon, not interrogating further, but thinking, walking slowly through the house, retracing paths, aligning motives with movements. The others mistook his quiet for indecision. In truth, he was arranging a maze, testing each corridor, until only one led forward without contradiction. Greed stood nearest the surface. Henry Pembroke's debts were substantial, his income insufficient to satisfy his creditors. Sir Alister's death freed him from expectation and delivered the promise of inheritance. Yet greed alone was clumsy. Henry's alibi wavered, yes, but he lacked subtlety. A man who returns to a drive and denies it entirely is careless, not clever. And the poison, no, Poirot felt certain Henry would have chosen something swifter, more brutal, less dependent on timing and restraint. Revenge presented itself in Frederick Lowell. Their quarrel had been sharp enough for servants to hear raised voices. Sir Alister had threatened to die. Solve their partnership, to expose irregularities. Motive, certainly. Opportunity, less so. Lowell had left the house openly, had made no attempt to conceal his anger. Poisoning a man hours later through an untouched cup required intimacy with the household's habits. Lowell knew factories and contracts, not bell pulls and spoons. Fear was quieter, but no less potent. Poirot paused near the servants' stairs, recalling Edith Mark's nervous glances. The girl had reason to tremble. Servants always do under suspicion. But her fear was focused. She feared not punishment, but discovery. Yet she possessed neither the knowledge nor the access to procure digitalis unnoticed. And she loved Sir Alister in the uncomplicated way young people love those who are kind to them. Fear, yes, but borrowed fear, not her own. That left Clara. Poirot did not accuse. He never did, not yet. Instead, he examined the shape of her motive, which was the most complex of all. She stood to inherit, yes, but money was only one strand. Sir Alister's opposition to her marriage had been fierce. He had threatened to change his will to place her allowance under strict control. Love, denied, can turn swiftly into desperation. Desperation breeds patience. Patience breeds method. Still, motive alone never satisfied Poirot. It must align with opportunity so precisely that nothing else fit. He returned to the study once more, alone. The bell pull. Anyone within reach could ring it. The sound would travel. The signal would be accepted. Sir Alister, accustomed to solitude, would not investigate. Someone could ring, wait, then approach the desk. If already inside the room earlier, Clara had been there last. Poirot considered the spoon again, removed, wiped, set aside. A small action, requiring neither haste nor strength. Digitalis on a spoon would be invisible, tasteless when cooled, lethal only after time had passed. A poison chosen not to kill at once, but to kill later, quietly, leaving confusion in its wake. Alibis were next. Henry returned but did not enter. Frederick left and stayed away. Edith moved only under instruction. Clara alone had both access and privacy before the door was locked. She had tasted the coffee safely, then returned the cup to the blotter, aligning it neatly, as Poirot had noticed. A mind that values order often reveals itself in such details. Yet one obstacle remained. Why the book? Why leave open the medical reference? Poirot smiled faintly. Misdirection, a suggestion of suicide or of amateur meddling. A seed planted for the doctor's mind. Clara, intelligent and observant, knew how men of science reasoned. As evening approached, Poirot gathered the household once more. He did not yet accuse. Instead, he spoke of motives in the abstract, of how crimes rarely spring from one cause alone. Greed without fear is reckless, he said mildly. Revenge without patience is loud, but when fear, love, and greed walk together, they tread very softly. Clara met his gaze steadily, but her hands tightened in her lap. Poirot inclined his head. The maze was nearly solved. Only one path remained that did not collide with a fact, a witness, or the quiet truth of the room itself. All that is left, he said gently, is to place each of you back into the evening as it truly occurred, not as you wish it remembered. When we do that, the poison will no longer deceive anyone at all. The silence that followed was no longer confusion. It was anticipation. The breakthrough came the following morning. Swift and decisive, and for everyone but Poirot, deeply satisfying. Inspector Jameson arrived with the air of a man who at last had the solid ground beneath his feet. In his hand he carried a small envelope, its contents apparently enough to dispel every lingering doubt. It was the gardener who had provided it. While clearing fallen leaves near the rear path, he had discovered a discarded vial beneath the hedges, a narrow glass container, faintly sticky inside. bearing the unmistakable scent of a medicinal tincture. The label, partially torn, still carried a legible word, digitalis. The police wasted no time. The vial, they declared, could not have come from the house stores, it must have been brought in. And there was only one person known to have returned to the grounds after dinner and then denied entering the house. Henry Pembroke was summoned at once. His protests were brief, indignant, and ultimately futile. The vial had been found not far from where his car had been seen. His debts were documented, his inheritance assured by Sir Alister's death. When pressed, his composure cracked just enough to confirm the inspector's confidence. "I told you I came back for papers," Henry snapped. "I changed my mind and left." "That proves nothing." "It proves opportunity," Jameson replied curtly. "And motive we have in abundance." By noon, Henry was under arrest. The house exhaled. Edith wept openly. Frederick Lowell departed with visible relief, and even Clara allowed herself a fragile smile, as though a crushing weight had been lifted from her chest. The servants whispered that justice was swift after all. Pembroke Court, which had felt like a chamber of secrets, seemed suddenly ordinary again. Only Poirot remained unmoved. He examined the vial carefully, turning it between gloved fingers, his expression unreadable. "Inspector," he said at last, "may I ask you something quite simple?" Jameson, flushed with success, nodded. "Of course. Why discard it here?" Jameson frowned. "Pardon? If one commits murder," Poirot continued mildly, "and carries away the container of poison, one disposes of it far from the scene, into a river perhaps, or one keeps it hidden. But to drop it in the garden, where gardeners dig and rake every day, this is careless." Henry laughed bitterly. "Careless? I was panicking." "Ah," Poirot said softly, "panic leaves fingerprints. This vial has none." The inspector stiffened. "You think it was planted?" "I think," Poirot replied, "that it tells us what we wish to hear. That makes it dangerous." Jameson waved the concern aside. "The lab confirms it contained digitalis." "That's enough." Poirot inclined his head politely but said no more. Instead, he watched Clara as Henry was led away. She did not look at her cousin. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor, her relief too composed, too complete. That afternoon, Poirot returned to the study alone. He stood where Sir Alister had died and closed his eyes, reconstructing the final hour. The coffee cooling, the spoon removed, the bell rung, the door locked, all correct, all precise. Then the vial intruded upon the picture like a discordant note. Digitalis, yes, but digitalis could be obtained in many forms. Why choose a vial at all when tablets dissolved would leave no trace? Why risk carrying it through the house, and why discard it only after the crime, when the poison had already done its work invisibly? No, Poirot decided. The vial belonged not to the crime, but to its concealment. Evening fell. Clara approached him in the corridor, her voice low. "Monsieur Poirot, it is finished, is it not?" Poirot studied her face. "Finished things do not trouble the mind," he said gently. "This one does." Her smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. That night, Poirot slept poorly. In the early hours he rose and walked the grounds, stopping near the hedges where the vial had been found. The earth was soft, recently disturbed, not by chance but deliberately, as though someone had pressed the glass into place. The real criminal, Poirot knew, had won time. The arrest clear. Ted confidence. Confidence breeds carelessness. As he turned back toward the house, a light flickered briefly in an upstairs window, then vanished. Poirot smiled thinly to himself. "Yes," he murmured, "now you believe you are safe. That is when mistakes are made." The false victory had been declared. But the poison, patient to the end, had one more deception left to reveal. The next morning, Poirot asked to see Sir Alister's private papers. Not the financial ledgers, those had already been combed, but the older correspondence, the letters kept not for use but for memory. Clara hesitated only a moment before granting permission. The key, she said, was in her uncle's desk drawer. Poirot noticed she knew exactly where. Alone in the small morning room, he read slowly. There were letters from decades past, written in a firmer, more hopeful hand. Among them, one name appeared again and again, Eleanor Hartwell. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Eleanor Hartwell had been Sir Alister's first wife, dead nearly 20 years. The circumstances, according to polite family history, had been unfortunate, but unremarkable. An illness of the heart. sudden, irreversible. A doctor's name appeared repeatedly in the margins of the letters, offering reassurance, prescribing tonics. Dr. Lionel Harcourt. Poirot closed the file gently. He sought out Harcourt at once. The doctor received him stiffly, irritation thinly veiled. Poirot spoke of Eleanor Hartwell, of the symptoms described in Sir Alister's old letters. Irregular pulse, nausea, weakness. Heart failure, Harcourt said at once. Perfectly ordinary. Digitalis was prescribed then, was it not? Poirot asked. Harcourt hesitated. Only a fraction of a second, but it was enough, in small doses. Standard practice at the time. And she died suddenly, Poirot murmured. Very suddenly. You are suggesting— I am suggesting nothing, Poirot said gent. Lie. I am remembering. The pieces aligned quietly. Digitalis again. A woman close to Sir Alister. A death accepted without question. Poirot returned to Pembroke Court with new clarity. Clara met him in the garden, near the winter-bare foxglove beds. You wished to see me? Yes, Poirot said. To ask about your mother. She stiffened. My mother died when I was a child. Of the heart, Poirot said softly. Like your uncle. Her composure wavered. Why speak of this now? Because, Poirot replied, you were raised by Sir Alister afterward. You watched him. You learned his habits. You also learned how your mother died, and what the doctors said. Tears welled, but Clara did not look away. They said it was fate. They were wrong, Poirot said. It was poison then too. Not murder. No. An overdose administered carelessly by a man confident in his own skill. Her breath caught. Dr. Harcourt, yes. And Sir Alister knew it eventually. That is why he opposed your marriage. The man you wished to marry was Harcourt's son. Silence fell heavy between them. He threatened to expose the truth, Clara whispered, to ruin them both. And so, Poirot said, you chose a poison that would expose him instead, or so you thought. Digitalis again. A pattern, if one looked far enough back. Clara sank onto the stone bench. I did not mean for Henry to be accused. No, Poirot agreed, but you meant for him to be plausible. She covered her face. I only wanted the truth to die with him. Poirot shook his head sadly. Truth does not die. It waits. That afternoon, Poirot confronted Inspector Jameson with the old records, the similarities, the doctor's involvement. The inspector listened grimly as the web tightened, not just around Clara, but around Harcourt himself, whose careless past had taught her exactly how to kill without suspicion. By evening, the false victory crumbled. Hen. Rye was released. Harcourt was detained for questioning. Clara, pale and resolute, offered no resistance. As Poirot watched the sun sink behind Pembroke Court, he reflected that the crime had never been only about inheritance or love denied. It was about a wound left untreated, festering quietly through years, waiting for the moment when poison would seem not like murder, but like justice. And justice, Poirot knew, was the most dangerous motive of all. Poirot did not press for immediate arrests beyond what procedure demanded. Instead, he requested something that puzzled Inspector Jameson greatly, that the household be gathered once more in the drawing-room, including Dr. Harcourt, who sat stiff-backed and pale, and Clara, whose calm now seemed almost unnatural in its steadiness. I require no questions just yet, Poirot said pleasantly. Only your presence and your patience. He arranged them as before, but with one deliberate change. Upon the small writing table between them, he placed two objects, the familiar coffee cup from the study, now cleaned and empty, and beside it, a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. This, Poirot announced lightly, is not digitalis. It is distilled water, entirely harmless. Several people exhaled at once. Harcourt's shoulders loosened by a fraction. Clara did not move at all. Poirot lifted the vial. We have spoken much of poison, of how it deceives the senses, how it hides its work. But poison, my friends, has one great weakness. It requires belief, belief that it is present, belief that it is dangerous. He poured a few drops from the vial onto the spoon he had retrieved earlier that morning from the kitchen drawer, its handle faintly discolored despite careful washing. Then, with exaggerated care, he stirred the spoon inside the empty cup. Dr. Harcourt leaned forward despite himself. What are you doing? Conducting a small experiment, Poirot replied cheerfully. One that does not test chemistry, but conscience. He set the spoon down and turned to Clara. Mademoiselle, yesterday you were very brave. Today I ask you to be practical. Will you take a sip? The room froze. Clara's eyes dropped to the cup. For the first time since Sir Alister's death, genuine fear crossed her face, not fear of accusation, but of the object itself. Her fingers tightened around the arms of her chair. "It is only water," Jameson said sharply. "Monsieur Poirot just told you so." "Yes," Poirot agreed softly. "And yet you hesitate," Clara swallowed. I do not see the point of this." Poirot inclined his head. "That is because the point is not for you. It is for us." He turned instead to Dr. Harcourt. "Perhaps you will drink, Doctor. You are a man of science. You know it is harmless." Harcourt's lips parted, then closed. A faint sheen of sweat appeared at his temple. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Parlour tricks, indeed," Poirot said gently. "And yet you prescribe drugs for a living. You trust them. You understand them. Why fear a cup of water?" Harcourt's gaze flicked to the spoon. "Just for an instant." Poirot smiled. "That," he said quietly, "is the crack." Jameson straightened. "What crack?" "The crack between knowledge and memory," Poirot replied. "Doctor, you have spent years associating that spoon, that cup, with death. Your mind knows there is no poison here. Your instincts do not believe it." He turned back to Clara. "And you, mademoiselle, you fear not the cup, but what it represents. You chose digitalis because it was familiar, because it belonged to your past. You believed it would make the death look natural, as it once did." Clara's composure shattered. "Stop," she whispered. Poirot did not raise his voice. "You could not drink because even pretending would force you to relive the act. That is the danger of poison. It lingers." Harcourt surged to his feet. "This proves nothing. It proves everything," Poirot replied calmly. "You taught her how death could be disguised. You did not mean to, but you did. Your careless confidence killed her mother. Her grief learned patience." Jameson stepped forward. "Dr. Harcourt, you are under—" Clara stood suddenly. "He did not tell me to do it," she said clearly. "He did not know. This was mine." Poirot regarded her sadly. "Yes, and that is why the trick worked. Guilt reacts. Innocence is merely offended." The room fell silent once more, but now it was the silence of resolution, not confusion. Poirot replaced the cup gently on the table. "You see, Inspector," he said, "facts speak, but sometimes it is fear that answers." The tension in the drawing-room had scarcely settled when it shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. Poirot sensed it before anyone spoke, a tightening, as though the truth, newly exposed, had startled something into motion. Inspector Jameson moved to escort Dr. Harcourt from the room, but Poirot raised a hand. "Not yet," he said quietly. "There is still one thing I require." He turned toward the writing table. The cup stood where he had placed it. The vial remained untouched, but the spoon that had carried the weight of memory and fear, was gone. For a moment, no one spoke. Poirot's eyes moved slowly from face to face. Clara stared at the table, confusion giving way to alarm. Harcourt looked genuinely startled now, his earlier defensiveness replaced by something closer to panic. "The spoon," Jameson said sharply. "Where is it?" No one answered. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, then nodded to himself. "We have reached the point," he said, "where truth becomes inconvenient." A search was ordered at once. Servants were questioned, rooms checked, drawers opened. The kitchen yielded nothing. Nor did the servants' hall, the study, or the garden paths. The spoon had vanished as neatly as it had once been removed from the cup. Someone, Poirot knew, was not content with implication alone. Someone wished to erase the final thread. As the house buzzed with suspicion, Poirot withdrew to the study once more. He examined the hearth again, and this time something was different. The ashes had been disturbed recently, not enough to draw attention, but enough to suggest interference. He crouched and sifted carefully through the grey remains until his fingers brushed against something brittle. Paper. Burned almost entirely, reduced to blackened curls, but not beyond recognition. He gathered the fragments gently and laid them upon the desk. A word emerged, faint but legible. Hartwell. Poirot's expression hardened. Someone had been very busy. Inspector Jameson joined him moments later, his face grim. "The spoon is nowhere, and the servants swear." "Yes, yes," Poirot said. "They always swear." Tell me instead, who knew it mattered? Jameson hesitated. You, me, Clara, Harcourt, and Henry, Poirot added softly. He was released, but not yet gone. Jameson stiffened. You think he— I think, Poirot said, that when a man is falsely accused, he does not always forgive easily, especially when the truth still threatens to destroy him by association. The inspector swore under his breath and hurried away. Poirot remained studying the fragments of paper. Letters, burned in haste. Someone feared the past more than the present. Clara was brought to him shortly afterward. She looked shaken now, her earlier resolve fraying. You think I destroyed them, she said quietly. No, Poirot replied. If you had, you would have done it thoroughly. Guilt is very careful. Then who? Poirot regarded her steadily. Someone who believes that by removing objects they can remove responsibility. A cry echoed faintly from the servants' corridor. Moments later, Jameson returned, breathless. Henry Pembroke has left the grounds. His luggage was found half-packed, and— He hesitated. We found a spoon in his coat pocket. Clara gasped. He's trying to frame himself now. Poirot shook his head. No. He is trying to finish what was started. Henry was intercepted at the gate, pale and furious. He denied nothing when confronted. You were all ready to blame me once, he said bitterly. Why not again? Let it end cleanly. Poirot stepped closer. You burned the letters, he said calmly. Not to protect Clara, but to protect yourself. If her mother's death was reopened, your family name would be ruined. Inheritance or not, you would lose everything. Henry laughed harshly. And you would prefer the scandal. I prefer the truth, Poirot replied, even when it burns. The spoon, recovered but now meaningless, lay between them like a spent weapon. The attempt to bury the past had only unearthed it further. As Henry was led away once more, this time in disgrace, rather than suspicion, Poirot allowed himself a quiet breath. The truth had nearly vanished, not through cleverness, but through fear. He looked at Clara gently. You see, mademoiselle, when evidence disappears, it is never because it was weak. It is because it was strong enough to frighten someone. The house fell silent again, but now every silence felt watched. The truth was exposed but fragile, and someone had nearly succeeded in destroying it forever. The night should have brought resolution. Instead, it brought violence. Poirot had just retired to the small guest room overlooking the east lawn when the scream cut through Pembroke Court, sharp, unmistakable, and terrifyingly close. It was followed by the sound of running feet and a crash that echoed through the corridor. Poirot was out of his room at once, his mind already racing ahead of his body. Inspector Jameson emerged from the opposite end of the hall, revolver drawn. They reached the servants' staircase together. At the foot of the stairs lay Dr. Harcourt. He had not fallen. That was evident at once. His body was twisted unnaturally, one hand clutching at his chest, the other smeared with blood that trailed along the banister. His eyes were open, fixed in an expression of pure shock rather than pain. Poirot knelt beside him, fingers already searching for signs of life. There were none. Jameson swore under his breath. How? We were watching him. Not closely enough, Poirot replied softly. A quick examination revealed the truth with chilling clarity. There was no wound deep enough to explain the speed of death. No blow, no fall. But on Harcourt's lips, barely visible in the lamplight, was a faint white residue. Poirot's face hardened. Poison, he said. And a fast one. The servants gathered, whispering in terror. Clara stood apart, pale as marble, her earlier guilt now eclipsed by horror. He was to be questioned in the morning, Jameson said grimly. Someone wanted to silence him. Yes, Poirot agreed. Or to ensure that he never spoke freely. The discovery changed everything. Until now, the crime had been singular, contained. This death proved there was another will at work, one willing to kill. Again, and without hesitation, seal the house, Jameson ordered. No one leaves. Poirot rose slowly. Inspector, he said, the danger is not past. It is accelerating. They moved Harcourt's body to the study once more, that room now bearing witness to 2 deaths. Poirot stood very still, his gaze fixed not on the corpse, but on the doctor's clenched hand. Carefully, he pried the fingers open. Inside was a crumpled scrap of paper. Only one word was written upon it, in a trembling hand, foxglove. Jameson stared. A confession? No. Poirot said quietly. A warning. Foxglove, the plant from which digitalis is derived. Harcourt, in his final moments, had understood something crucial. Perhaps he had been threatened. Perhaps he had realized that the poison he once mishandled had been replaced by something far more deliberate. Someone poisoned him, Jameson said slowly, with a different substance. Yes, Poirot replied. Digitalis would not act so swiftly. This was chosen for speed, for certainty. The implications settled heavily between them. Whoever was behind this was no longer hiding behind patience or misdirection. They were removing obstacles. Poirot's thoughts returned immediately to Clara, not as the killer but as the target. Her confession, incomplete though it was, had shifted blame dangerously close to her. If the truth emerged fully, it would not end with her alone. She is still in danger, Poirot said suddenly. Jameson looked at him sharply. From whom? Poirot's eyes swept the room. From the person who has lost control of the story. A frantic search followed. Rooms were checked, doors secured, and then came the second shock. Clara was gone. Her room showed no sign of struggle. The window was open. On the dressing table lay a small note, written hastily, I will not let anyone else die because of me. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. This, he said, is the real crime. Jameson stared at him. You think she's running? I think she believes she must sacrifice herself, Poirot replied. And that belief was encouraged. They hurried outside. The night air was cold, the grounds dark and treacherous. Poirot's mind raced through the sequence with ruthless logic. Harcourt poisoned to prevent revelation. Clara driven to despair. The past being erased one witness at a time. But there was something else now. Something more dangerous than guilt. Someone was shaping events. Poirot stopped suddenly near the foxglove beds. The plants stood dark and motionless, their bell-shaped flowers swaying faintly in the night breeze. Beside them, the soil had been disturbed once again. A second trail. Poirot straightened, urgency sharpening his voice. Inspector, whoever is doing this is not fleeing. They are advancing. Jameson looked at him grimly. Toward what? Poirot turned toward the darkened path leading beyond the grounds. Toward a final act, he said. And if we do not stop it, the poison that fooled everyone will claim its last victim. They set off at once, the night closing around them, the investigation no longer a matter of understanding the past, but of racing ahead of a killer who was no longer content to wait. They followed the path beyond the foxglove beds at a brisk pace, lanterns swinging, the night heavy with the damp scent of earth and leaves. Clara's footprints were faint but visible where the soil had been disturbed, leading toward the old glass house at the edge of the estate. It was there that Poirot slowed, not from fatigue, but from thought. Chaos pressed around them. 2 deaths, a disappearance, a killer moving freely, but within the disorder, something had begun to repeat itself with quiet insistence. He stopped suddenly. Inspector, Poirot said, tell me, when Sir Alister rang the bell that night, what exactly did? It signify, Jameson frowned, that he wanted nothing further. It was his habit. Precisely, Poirot murmured, a habit. And habits, mon ami, are patterns that people stop questioning. They resumed walking, but Poirot's mind had turned inward. The bell, the spoon, the careful alignment of objects on the desk, the book placed just so. Again and again the same quality appeared. Not violence, not haste, but control. Someone who believed that if each small thing were correct, the larger truth would arrange itself accordingly. They reached the glass house. The door stood ajar. Inside, the air was warm and sharp with plant matter. Rows of dormant pots lined the shelves, but one corner drew Poirot's eye at once. There, sheltered from the frost, grew foxglove, healthy, carefully tended. Too carefully, Sir Alister did not garden, Jameson said quietly. No, Poirot agreed, but someone else did, someone who valued patience. They found Clara seated on a wooden bench, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She looked up at once, relief and despair warring on her face. I did not take anything, she said quickly. I came here to think. Poirot approached her gently. You came here because this place feels safe. Familiar, she hesitated. My mother used to bring me here. Poirot nodded. The words settled into place like the final piece of a mosaic. Not Clara alone. Always the garden, always the bell, always the study arranged just so. He straightened and turned to Jameson. Inspector, who, besides Sir Alistair, had unrestricted access to the house at all hours. Jameson blinked. The valet, the servants, and who knew every habit, every signal. Who could ring a bell without question, move a spoon without notice, place a book without suspicion? Understanding dawned slowly. George Vickers. Yes, Poirot said softly. Faithful, invisible George. They returned to the house at On. Vickers was nowhere to be found. His room was empty, his belongings neatly packed, too neatly. On his bedside table lay a small notebook. Poirot opened it carefully. Inside were dates. Names. 2 entries were underlined: Eleanor Hartwell. Sir Alistair Pembroke. Not grief, Poirot murmured. Devotion. Vickers had been Eleanor's brother. The pattern was suddenly clear. A sister lost to a doctor's carelessness. A benefactor who knew but chose silence. Years of service, of watching, of waiting. Clara's resentment had been real, but guided. The vial planted, the spoon stolen. Harcourt poisoned to silence him before he could confess fully. Clara driven to run to draw attention away. He never needed to touch the coffee, Poirot said quietly. Only the spoon, only the bell, only the small things no one watches. They found George Vickers at the servants' gate, a syringe in his pocket, his expression calm, almost serene. I only corrected what was wrong, he said simply when confronted. They lived comfortably on quiet deaths. Poirot regarded him sadly. And now you add another. No, Vickers replied. I end them. Jameson signalled the constables forward. As Vickers was led away, Poirot turned back toward the house, now dark and still. The pattern had been there all along, in habits, in order, in the quiet confidence of someone no one truly saw. The poison had fooled everyone because it was never about poison at all. It was about patience. And patience, Poirot knew, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Back at Pembroke Court, the household gathered once more in the drawing-room. The tension that had hung like a heavy curtain over the estate now felt taut, ready to snap. Vickers sat in a chair, hands bound, his calm facade intact, yet his eyes betrayed the slightest flicker of apprehension. Poirot, seated opposite him, radiated a quiet authority that seemed to fill the room. George Vickers, Poirot began, his voice soft yet precise. You have been many things this evening, unseen, unnoticed, patient and careful. You have moved cups and books, stolen spoons and silenced a man, yet, for all your cleverness, you have left a trail, a pattern so simple that it has taken me some nights of observation to discern it. Vickers inclined his head slightly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You flatter me, Monsieur Poirot, he said calmly. I did what had to be done. Poirot leaned forward, fingers lightly steepled. And what, pray tell, is that reason? You have spoken little, and yet acted with such conviction. Was it vengeance, greed, love perhaps, or something darker still? Vickers met his gaze steadily. None of those, he said quietly. I acted for the truth. For justice. A murmur went through the assembled company. Clara, pale and exhausted, pressed her hands to her lap. Jameson's jaw tightened. Justice? You murdered 2 men, now you would claim justice? Poirot nodded slightly. Yes, Inspector. And here lies the crucial point. What you call justice, monsieur, is not the same as law. And for Vickers, it is not about money or power. It is about moral order, about correcting a wrong no one else has dared acknowledge. He turned fully to Vickers. You are Eleanor Hartwell's brother. She died young, in the care of Dr. Harcourt. Digitalis, administered by him, ended her life, perhaps unintentionally, but still fatally. Your sister, as you loved her, and as the world dismissed her death, became a ghost that haunted you. Vickers did not flinch. Yes, he admitted simply. She deserved recognition, not secrecy. Sir Alistair knew the truth, but he allowed it to remain hidden. The man who had caused her death lived freely, respected and admired. I could not endure it. Poirot inclined his head, slowly letting the words settle over the room. So you watched and waited, he said, patiently. You learned the habits of the household, the rhythms of its members. You studied Sir Alistair, knowing that eventually an opportunity would arise to restore some sense of justice, not through courts, which would fail you, but through subtle influence. A spoon moved, a bell rung, a cup of coffee. It was never about the act itself, but the orchestration of consequence. Vickers' expression hardened, almost serene. You understand. Only when everyone is complacent, when guilt is ignored, can one act without interruption. The deaths were precise, necessary. Clara's voice trembled as she whispered, "And my uncle did this to him?" "No," Vickers said gently, almost mournfully. "I did not strike Sir Alistair. He was a careful man, observing, cautious, yet he failed to act when he could have made amends for my sister. That is why he had to die, indirectly if possible. And for Harcourt, the lesson was direct." Poirot allowed a long silence. Then, quietly, he said, "And now, having revealed your method, your pattern, and your reason, do you see that your justice has demanded not only cleverness but murder? That moral order, as you understand it, requires you to live with consequences you impose on others." Vickers' eyes flickered briefly, a shadow of uncertainty. "Perhaps," he admitted softly. "But a life ignored, a death unacknowledged, left one choice." "I did what was required." Poirot sighed, not with disapproval but with the weight of understanding. "You acted from love and grief. That is why it is so shocking. Not for the acts themselves, which we can comprehend, but for the purity of your reasoning, your willingness to kill calmly because conscience demanded it, not passion or gain. That is the hidden motive, the true engine of this crime, devotion to a past injustice, carried into the present, made tangible. In lives taken and chaos orchestrated." Clara sat rigid, trembling, tears spilling freely. Jameson gritted his teeth, anger and frustration warring within him. Vickers, composed once more, met Poirot's gaze. "You see me, finally," he said. "Yes," Poirot replied. "And in seeing, we understand. The poison, the subtlety, the timing, every detail has been part of your statement. It is an extraordinary mind, and a terrible justice." The room fell silent. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, as though the house itself exhaled. The hidden motive, love, grief, and the unrelenting pursuit of what Vickers deemed right had emerged from the shadows, revealing a psychology both compelling and horrifying. And in that revelation, the final act of the mystery loomed, demanding that law, conscience, and morality converge in judgment. Poirot remained in the drawing-room long after Vickers had been removed to a temporary holding space, his mind assembling the final pieces like a watchmaker aligning gears. He knew the moment for confrontation had to be perfect, swift, inevitable, and without doubt. There could be no hesitation, no half measures. The villain was patient and meticulous. The trap had to mirror that precision. He instructed Jameson to leave the main corridor open and to station officers discreetly in the servants' hall and near the rear exit. Poirot himself returned to the study, carefully arranging the desk as it had been on the night of Sir Alistair's death, the cup, the spoon, and the medical reference book, all in their precise positions. Every detail was deliberate, every object a lure, a signal to draw the mind of the guilty. Clara remained nearby, seated quietly, watching, her hands folded, pale but calm. Poirot did not speak of her presence. It was necessary that she witness, yet not interfere. The hour passed, the night pressing its silence into the house, and faintly, a soft footfall on the polished floorboards announced the arrival of the person he had been waiting for. Vickers entered, cautious, eyes sweeping the room, as though he were already calculating every angle. He paused at the doorway, uncertain. Poirot did not rise. Instead, he gestured lightly toward the desk. "Monsieur Vickers," he said softly, "please, come closer. I have been expecting you." Vickers hesitated, then advanced, careful, controlled, like a predator aware of the trap. His gaze settled on the cup and the spoon. For a fraction of a second, recognition flitted across his face, subtle but undeniable. Poirot's expression remained calm, almost benign, yet his eyes glimmered with the certainty of knowledge. "You understand why this is here," Poirot said gently. "Do you see the pattern, as it has always been? The bell, the cup, the spoon, all trivial things, yet all immensely significant." Vickers' jaw tightened. "I see nothing but trivialities," he replied evenly. "And yet you are smiling." "Yes," Poirot said, "because I understand you. Your reasoning, your patience, your devotion to a truth no one else valued. I have seen it, monsieur, and now you are alone. You are surrounded only by the consequences of your own cleverness." Vickers' hand moved slightly toward his coat pocket. Poirot did not flinch. "Do not waste your effort," he said softly. "I know that you carry nothing more than what has already been found. Every move you could make, every escape you might consider, has been anticipated. The trap is not in the room. It is in the inevitability of your own design." The man's composure faltered for the briefest instant, almost imperceptible, but enough. His lips tightened. "You underestimate me, detective. I have patience. I have planning. You cannot stop what I began." Poirot inclined his head slightly. "And yet you will not leave this room. Will you? Because leaving would betray all that you believe, control, order, and the perfection of your scheme. You are bound not by handcuffs, but by your own mind." Vickers' eyes darted toward the door, then back. He knew it was true. Every escape had been foreseen, every reaction anticipated, and in that moment the weight of inevitability pressed upon him. His hands fell to his sides, the last vestige of defiance slipping away. "I acted for my sister," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "For Eleanor? For the truth, yes," Poirot said, leaning forward slightly, "and in that devotion you created tragedy. Sir Alistair, Harcourt, almost Clara. Yet now, seeing all that has passed, do you understand that truth alone does not absolve the hand that strikes to enforce it?" Vickers' shoulders slumped. He no longer searched for an escape. I see," he admitted. "I only wanted to set right what was wrong. I did not intend—" His words trailed, unformed, as the full measure of his actions pressed upon him. Poirot's gaze softened. "Intent, monsieur, is never the same as consequence, and yet justice, in its own patient way, will follow now, not through further death, but through law. You will answer, but you will also be seen at last for the complexity of your mind, for the depth of your loyalty, and for the danger of devotion unchecked." The sound of officers entering to formally take Vickers into custody did not startle him. He stood slowly, composed, finally allowing himself to be led away. Clara exhaled, a trembling release, and Jameson closed the door behind them with a mixture of relief and awe. Poirot remained for a moment in the study, looking at the arrangement on the desk. The cup, the spoon, the book, symbols of subtlety and patience, had lured the mind of the guilty into self-exposure. He straightened, smoothing his coat. Every piece was in place, every deception revealed, and at last the long shadow that had fallen across Pembroke Court lifted, leaving the house and its occupants to face the daylight of truth. The house had finally begun to settle. Officers moved quietly through the halls, confirming that Vickers had been secured, and the household, though shaken, was breathing in tentative relief. Clara remained in the drawing-room, her hands folded tightly, eyes staring at the fireplace as if it held some secret truth she could not yet face. Poirot, meanwhile, walked slowly along the corridors, examining the subtle alignments of the furniture and the residual evidence of human movement, as he always did. Yet even as calm seemed to descend, Poirot's instincts pricked. Something remained unsettled. He had caught the patterns, seen the motives, and orchestrated the final confrontation. And yet there was a detail, a small, overlooked hint, that had never quite aligned with the others. The disappearance of the letters, the meticulous placement of the spoon, the timing of Harcourt's death, all had pointed to Vickers. But one element had always seemed slightly askew, the recovery of the vial of digitalis from the garden. It had been too obvious, too perfectly timed to seem accidental. Someone had allowed it to be found. But who, and why? He returned to the study, eyes sweeping the desk and shelves once more. The cup sat exactly where it had during the confrontation, the spoon replaced in its accustomed spot. Then Poirot's gaze shifted subtly to the sideboard, where Sir Alistair's desk keys had been left unattended after the initial investigation. One key, small and brass, gleamed faintly in the lamplight. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand, and a thought crystallized. It could not have been Vickers. No, Vickers had acted patiently, methodically, but he had no reason to draw attention to himself beyond what was necessary. The vial, the burned letters, someone else had engineered that part. Someone who had been present all along, invisible to suspicion, whose cleverness had hidden behind the chaos of the other events. Poirot called Clara over quietly. Mademoiselle, one final question. Who has been nearest to the poisoned coffee cup after the initial incident, observing carefully, yet remaining ostensibly innocent? She hesitated, eyes narrowing slightly as she considered. The maid, Eleanor? No, I mean Mrs. Latimer. She served coffee throughout the house, though I thought she had no interest in the affairs of the family. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Exactly, mademoiselle. Mrs. Latimer, the one who moved silently, observed constantly, and yet always seemed to serve without comment. She knew the habits, the placement of objects, and the reactions of every household member. Her subtle influence had allowed events to unfold almost perfectly, shaping the perceptions of both Vickers and the household. She was the hidden hand. Clara's eyes widened. The housekeeper? Yes. She guided, arranged, and facilitated the scenario. The vial's placement, the apparent misdirection with the spoon, the burned letters, all orchestrated to ensure that Vickers appeared guilty, yet constrained. She was the master of the environment, the true conductor behind the symphony. Poirot moved swiftly, summoning Jameson. Officers accompanied him to the servants' hall. Mrs. Latimer, surprised but composed, greeted him with a polite smile. "Monsieur Poirot, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Madame," Poirot said calmly, "you have watched too long, too carefully. You have ensured that certain truths remained hidden and that others were exposed in a manner most convenient. You shaped events, and now it is clear." Her expression flickered, just slightly, before settling again into polite neutrality. I merely kept the household in order," she said. "Order, yes," Poirot said gently. "But you knew the nature of the poison, the timing, the habitual movements of Sir Alister. You guided Vickers without his knowledge, nudged him toward the outcome you preferred, and made sure that others perceived the events according to your design." Jameson stepped forward, astonished. "So Vickers was not the sole perpetrator?" "No," Poirot said. "He acted with devotion and grief, following a pattern of his own, but he was manipulated. Mrs. Latimer ensured that the pieces aligned to her purpose. She is the last hidden strategist." The house seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Latimer's smile faded into a grim set of her lips. "You think I wanted death?" she said coldly. "No, I wanted control. Everything else was a byproduct." Poirot inclined his head. "And yet, control led to tragedy. Even the best-laid plans cannot erase human consequence. The officers moved to secure her, and she allowed herself to be led away without resistance, her expression calm, unflinching, a final testament to the subtle genius and danger that had almost fooled them all." Poirot returned to the drawing-room, alone now, and allowed himself a small, thoughtful sigh. Every piece was in place, every deception revealed. The mastermind, hidden in plain sight, had been unmasked. But the complexity of human motives, the devotion, the grief, the desire for control, remained as enduring and perilous as ever. The poison had fooled everyone, but in the end, the truth, relentless and patient, had won. The dawn rose pale and misty over Pembroke Court, brushing the frost-kissed lawns with a weak, trembling light. Inside, the house seemed lighter as well, as if the weight of unseen manipulations and hidden motives had begun to lift. Officers moved quietly through the corridors, ensuring that Mrs. Latimer and Vickers were secure, their fates now tied inexorably to the law. Clara sat near the fireplace, a shawl draped over her shoulders, staring into the flickering embers as though seeing each recent tragedy replayed in the dancing shadows. Poirot entered the room, walking with his customary measured steps. He did not speak immediately, instead surveying the room, the arrangement of furniture, the slight dust on the table that hinted at the careful cleaning the night before. Every detail had been observed, every pattern catalogued, and now the final reckoning seemed at hand. "Mademoiselle," he began gently, "we have seen much unfold in these last days, death, deception, and the subtle hand of a hidden mind. Yet I wish to speak plainly, for the understanding of all here is essential." Clara raised her eyes, wary but attentive. "The crime," Poirot continued, "was deceptively simple on its surface. Digitalis, a cup of coffee, a seemingly misplaced spoon. These were the tools that drew suspicion. Yet the true danger lay not in their use, but in their orchestration. Vickers acted from devotion and grief, moved by memories of a sister lost too soon. But he was guided, unknowingly, by Mrs. Latimer, who shaped perception, and ensured that the consequences of his actions unfolded according to her design. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The vial found in the garden, the burned letters, the false trail of guilt, they were not Vickers' work alone. They were carefully positioned to reinforce a narrative that would mislead us, and in doing so, she almost escaped detection entirely. That is why the case seemed so elusive, so tangled. One must look not only at acts, but at the hands that guide them. Clara's lips trembled. "And now, they're both secure," Poirot said. "The law will judge them as it must. Vickers for acting with grief as his motive, and Mrs. Latimer for her manipulation and orchestration. Justice, however, is not only a matter of confinement, it is recognition of patterns, of truths that linger even when the guilty attempt to vanish into shadows." Inspector Jameson, standing near the door, nodded solemnly. "A remarkable case, Monsieur Poirot. I confess I was misled at every turn." Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile playing across his lips. "Indeed, Inspector. But consider the hidden cues you may have overlooked. The subtle disturbance in the ashes of the hearth, the slight hesitation of Harcourt at the mention of digitalis, the timing of Clara's own reactions. These were all markers, signs of the deeper story. Each human movement, each minor habit, had meaning if one observes carefully enough. That is why, in these matters, one must never be complacent." He moved to the desk, lifting the spoon and turning it slowly in his hand. The spoon was more than an object. It was a mirror to conscience, a test of reaction, a small instrument that revealed the invisible mind behind the actions. The human heart and its hidden fears can be shown in the slightest hesitation, the smallest act of avoidance. That is how the pattern was uncovered. Clara exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her shoulders. "It feels almost like the nightmare is over." Poirot regarded her with quiet understanding. "The nightmare, mademoiselle, is never fully gone. Humans are creatures of habit, capable of both great love and terrible error. But tonight the immediate danger has passed. The law has its due, the guilty are revealed, and the truth is no longer hidden." Yet, as he spoke, Poirot's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the distant line of trees at the edge of the estate. Something about the shifting light, a movement caught at the periphery, reminded him that human cunning is rarely entirely extinguished. Some minds, even when constrained, lay echoes behind. The house, the evidence, the past, they linger in memory, teaching patience and vigilance. Poirot placed the spoon gently back on the table. Justice, in its fullest sense, is rarely perfect. Yet the essential truth has been made visible. Every deception uncovered, every motive exposed, and while we may breathe easier today, one must always remain aware the human heart, when guided by obsession or grief, can find ways to elude even the most meticulous scrutiny. That is why the detective must always observe, and never assume the game has truly ended. Clara nodded slowly, the firelight glinting in her tear-brimmed eyes, and Jameson exhaled, a mixture of relief and lingering awe settling over him. Poirot, with his precise composure restored, allowed a small smile. The case was concluded, the guilty apprehended, yet the quiet thrill of the hunt, the intricate dance of observation and deduction remained, the endless, inexhaustible challenge of human nature and its secrets. The house had fallen into a tentative calm. The frost outside glimmered in the early morning sun, and the mist was slowly lifting from the grounds. Officers continued their final rounds, ensuring that Mrs. Latimer and Vickers were secured for the authorities, while Clara sat quietly by the fireplace, her face pale but reflective, as if processing the enormity of what had just occurred. Poirot lingered in the drawing-room, his eyes sweeping over the familiar furniture, the cup and spoon still neatly arranged, the air charged with the faint echo of secrets now revealed. Yet, as he gazed at the room, a shadow of thought crossed his mind. Even with every piece of the puzzle seemingly in place, there was a subtle irregularity he could not dismiss. A scrap of burned paper had survived the fire, barely legible, with the faintest trace of handwriting that had not yet been deciphered. The fragments had seemed trivial, almost accidental, but Poirot's instinct told him otherwise. There was always something that eludes attention, something small yet crucial, waiting for the right mind to notice it. He turned, picking up the remaining fragment. The word Hartwell was visible, but beneath it an almost imperceptible loop of ink suggested another letter, or perhaps a second word. The message had been deliberately obscured, another layer in the intricate web that had guided events at Pembroke Court. Poirot held it gently, as though touching a living thing, feeling the residue of intention behind it. Clara stirred, noticing his focus. "Monsieur Poirot, is there something more?" Poirot looked at her, his expression softening but distant. "Mademoiselle, we have unravelled the primary threads of this case, and justice, as it is measured by law, will now take its course. Yet, in the nature of mysteries, there are always shadows that linger. Small indications, slight anomalies, whispers of motives and actions that even the most careful observer may overlook. This fragment, it hints at a past, or perhaps a future, that we have not yet fully perceived." Clara shivered slightly, not from cold but from the unspoken suggestion that the story might not be fully over. "You mean someone else?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Not necessarily a person, mademoiselle. It may be a consequence, a connection, a secret yet to be revealed. The world is full of details that appear trivial until the precise moment arrives. That is why the detective must remain vigilant, observing not only what is present, but what is missing." He placed the fragment back on the mantel, aligning it with the faint indentation of the letters beside it, as if leaving it ready for another day when its significance would become clear. Poirot straightened, smoothing his coat with meticulous care, the faintest smile playing on his lips. The sun had risen higher, casting the room in warm, forgiving light, yet the shadows of untold stories lingered along the corners. Jameson entered quietly, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering perplexity. "Monsieur Poirot, do you believe there is more to uncover?" "Always, Inspector," Poirot replied. "The world is not satisfied with resolution. It moves, shifts, and leaves behind hints for those who wish to see. Even when justice has been served, there remain threads, small, subtle, almost invisible, that may one day weave into a tapestry. One must not assume that a case ever truly ends." He moved to the window, gazing across the frost-dappled grounds. Somewhere in the distance, a figure passed, a servant perhaps, or merely a shadow of movement. But Poirot's gaze lingered with measured attention. He sensed instinctively that Pembroke Court's calm was a temporary pose, not a conclusion. Human hearts are rarely so simple that a single solution satisfies them entirely. Clara approached, curiosity and residual fear mingling in her expression. "Monsieur Poirot, will there be another danger?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly, the hint of a smile tugging at his moustache. "Mademoiselle, danger is never far, and neither is intrigue. For every question answered, there arises another. The mind of man, and the secrets it keeps, is inexhaustible. We have seen the patterns, we have seen the motives, yet there are always details waiting to be noticed, waiting to speak, and it is those whispers of truth that will call me again." With that, he turned from the window and strode toward the door, staff in hand, his figure casting a long shadow along the polished floor. Outside, the mist was lifting fully now, revealing the gardens and the faint tracks of last night's events. He paused briefly, glancing back over the drawing-room, as though acknowledging the lingering presence of mystery itself. "Yes," he murmured to himself, almost inaudibly, "all is resolved. For now." Yet the world holds many secrets, and a detective's work is never truly finished. With measured steps, Poirot walked out into the morning light, leaving behind the estate, the solved murders, and the lingering uncertainty, carrying with him the quiet promise of another case, another puzzle, another shadow that would demand his singular attention. The mystery never ends. It only waits for the one who knows how to see it.